It began with a rumor. Somewhere in the Aegean, a palace had burned. Then another. Then the reports stopped coming. By 1200 BC, the kings of Egypt, Hatti, Mycenae, and Babylon still ruled the greatest civilizations the world had ever seen. Within 50 years, 3 of those empires would be gone. Entire cities erased, writing systems forgotten. Trade routes that had carried tin from Afghanistan to Ireland simply ceased. This was the late Bronze Age collapse, the first true dark age in recorded history. And at its heart, a shadowy enemy, the Sea Peoples. No one knows exactly who they were, but we know what they destroyed, and the lesson of their age still haunts ours. To understand the collapse, you have to understand what came before. From roughly 1500 BC to 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was a world of glittering palaces, diplomatic marriages, and royal correspondence. 4 great powers dominated: Egypt's new kingdom, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, the Kassite kingdom of Babylon, and the Mycenaean Greeks. Between them, smaller but wealthy states like Ugarit, Cyprus, Troy, and the Canaanite city-states. This was not a peaceful world. The Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC involved 5,000 chariots, but it was a stable one. Kings called each other brother. They exchanged gold, lapis lazuli, and cedarwood. They married their daughters to each other's sons. And they all depended on one thing: bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. Copper was common. Cyprus itself is named for it. But tin was rare. Almost all of the tin in the Bronze Age came from one place: the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, near the ancient city of Merv. From there, it traveled 3,000 kilometers, across the Iranian plateau, down the Euphrates, through Babylon, then west to Hatti, south to Egypt, and across the sea to Mycenaean Greece. One interruption in that supply chain, and no one could make new swords, spearheads, or armor. No one could equip an army. No king could pay his followers. The entire system was a house of cards. In the late 13th century BC, the cards began to tremble. Paleoclimatologists have reconstructed the weather of the era using pollen cores from the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and Lake Van in eastern Turkey. Their findings are stark. Between 1250 and 1100 BC, the eastern Mediterranean suffered a prolonged drought, the worst in 3,000 years. In the Hittite heartland, rainfall dropped by nearly 30%. Crop failures became famine. Hittite records from the reign of Tudhaliya IV around 1230 BC speak of grain shipments arriving too late. Then they stopped speaking at all. Meanwhile, the earth itself turned violent. Seismologists have identified a cluster of major earthquakes between 1225 and 1175 BC, what archaeologist Amos Nur calls an earthquake storm. One quake after another struck Greece, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Levant. Each one toppled city walls, destroyed granaries, and killed thousands. A single earthquake can cripple a kingdom. A dozen over 50 years can erase it. Into this world of drought and tremors came the first signs of invasion. Around 1207 BC, the pharaoh Merneptah, the son of Ramesses X, recorded a battle. Libyan tribes, allied with a coalition of northerners, had marched on the Nile Delta. Merneptah's victory inscription lists the enemies he slaughtered. Libyans, of course, but also the Sherdan, the Shekelesh, the Luka, the Tersha, and the Akawash. He boasts of killing 6,000 Libyans and taking 9,000 prisoners, but buried in that same text is a confession. These northerners had come with their families and their cattle. This was not a raid, this was a migration. Then the record goes silent for 30 years. When it resumes, the world is unrecognizable. The year is 1180 BC. The Hittite capital Hattusa is a smoking ruin. Once a sprawling city of 30,000 people with massive stone walls and a royal archive of 25,000 clay tablets, Hattusa was burned so thoroughly that archaeologists would later find arrowheads fused into the mud brick. The Hittite king, whoever he was, died in the flames. No successor claimed the throne. After 400 years, the Hittite Empire simply vanished. At the same time, across the Aegean, the Mycenaean palaces were falling. Mycenae itself, Tiryns, Pylos, Thebes, all burned. At Pylos, a linear B tablet known as the Pylos Rower tablet was found still wet, as if the scribe had dropped it mid-sentence. It lists the names of oarsmen being mustered to defend the coast. They never launched. The palace was torched, and for the next 300 years, Greece had no writing, no monumental architecture, no international trade. The Greek Dark Ages had begun, but the most haunting evidence comes from the city of Ugarit on the coast of modern Syria. Ugarit was a wealthy port, a hub for copper and cedar. Its kings corresponded with Egypt, Hatti, and Cyprus. In the late 1180s BC, the last king of Ugarit, Amurapi, wrote a desperate letter to the king of Cyprus. It survives in the ashes of the city. Listen to his words. "My father, now the ships of the enemy have been coming. They have been setting fire to my cities and have done harm to the land. Does my father not know that all of my infantry and chariotry are stationed in Hatti, and that all my ships are stationed in the land of Lucca? Now the 7 ships of the enemy which have been coming have done harm to us." 7 ships. That is all it took to panic a king, because those 7 ships were not alone. They were the vanguard of the sea peoples. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III left us the most detailed account. At his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, carved in stone, are the reliefs of a great naval battle. The year is 1177 BC. Ramesses III had been on the throne for less than a decade. He watched as a vast fleet of enemy vessels sailed down the coast of Canaan, burning every city in their path. He gave the enemy a name. In his inscription he wrote, "No land could stand before their arms. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth. Their hearts were confident, trusting in their plans." Then he describes the coalition, the Peliset, the Danaan, the Cheker, the Shekelesh, and the Weshesh. 9 nations in total, some of them already known from Merneptah's time. The Egyptians called them the peoples of the sea. Ramesses III stopped them. He built a wall of ships across the Nile Delta. His archers rained arrows from the shore. The enemy vessels capsized. He claimed to have slaughtered thousands. And then, crucially, he did something unexpected. He did not annihilate the survivors. He settled them. The Medinet Habu reliefs show Egyptian scribes recording the names of captured sea peoples. The Peliset were given land in southern Canaan. Within a generation, they would become known by a different name, the Philistines, the biblical rivals of Israel, the people of Goliath. But Egypt's victory came at a terrible cost. The treasury was exhausted. Trade with the former Hittite lands and Mycenaean Greece had stopped completely. Egyptian grain shipments to the old empires, once a source of immense wealth, now went nowhere. Ramesses III would be assassinated in a palace conspiracy just a few decades later. Egypt survived, but it would never again be a great power. The new kingdom died a slow death, its pharaohs ruling over a shrinking, impoverished land. So who were the sea peoples? Scholars have debated this for 200 years. The most likely answer is not a single nation, but a snowball. The collapse began with the drought. The drought caused famine. The famine drove people from the countryside into the cities. The cities, already weakened by earthquakes, could not feed them. Uprisings followed. The old elites were overthrown. And then, as the palace economies crumbled, the mercenaries who had once served those kings found themselves unpaid, hungry, and desperate. They had weapons, they had ships, they had nothing left to lose. Some of those mercenaries came from western Anatolia, the Lucca and the Sherden. Some came from the Mycenaean world, the Denian and the Ekwesh. Some may have come from as far away as Sicily and Sardinia, where archaeologists have found bronze figurines of horned, helmeted warriors that look exactly like the Medinet Habu reliefs. And some were simply opportunists, pirates who had always raided the coast, but now found the coast undefended. What they shared was not an ethnicity. It was a moment, a window of chaos so wide that entire civilizations fell through it. By 1150 BC, the old world was gone. The Hittite Empire had vanished so completely that later Greeks would believe the Hittite ruins were built by giants. The Mycenaean palaces were ash and memory. Babylon had been sacked by the Elamites in 1158 BC, its great ziggurat abandoned. The international trade network that had carried tin from Afghanistan, amber from the Baltic, and ivory from Nubia simply stopped. For more than a century, no large stone buildings were constructed anywhere in the eastern Mediterranean. Writing survived only in Egypt and Assyria. Everywhere else, people lived in small villages, farming just enough to survive. The Bronze Age collapse is the closest thing history has to a total system failure. It was not the first dark age. That was the end of the Sumerian city-states around 2000 BC, but it was the most complete. It wiped out the first globalized world. And here is the lesson that lingers. The Bronze Age kingdoms were not primitive. They were sophisticated, interconnected, and resilient until they were not. A decade of drought, a cluster of earthquakes, a few hundred ships of desperate migrants. That was enough to unravel 3,000 years of civilization. The same forces, climate change, migration, economic interdependence, exist today. We tell ourselves that our world is too advanced to fall. The Hittites told themselves the same thing. The Sea Peoples left no monuments, no literature, no kings' names. They passed through history like a wave, breaking everything in their path, then receding into anonymity. But they left one message, carved in stone by their enemies. No land could stand before them. Not because they were invincible, because the lands had already broken themselves. The question is not whether the Sea Peoples were real. The question is whether we would recognize our own Sea Peoples if they were already sailing toward us.